In this picture, there are many different species interacting in different ways. For example, this caterpillar is eating the leaf, and these larvae are feeding off of the caterpillar. These are the type of interactions we're going to explore in our video on communities today. And let's start with an overview by defining community. This picture shows a community that we would find in an aquatic ecosystem. A community is simply all of the species living in a particular area. You could also think of it as all the biotic components of an ecosystem. And these species are going to interact, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, and sometimes in neutral ways. Now we can analyze the structure of a community in two ways. Here are two different communities. Now, one way we can look at these communities is in terms of species richness. This is simply the number of different species. And if we compare our two communities, they have the same species richness. This community has 4 different plant species, and this community has 4 different plant species. However, we can look at species abundance as well, and this is the percentage of each species. And here the communities differ, because in community 1, there is 25% of each plant species, but in community 2, plant A dominates at 80%, and the other 3 species are in a much lower proportion. Now let's take a look at types of interactions known as symbiotic interactions. Symbiosis is something you've seen before if you've ever watched Finding Nemo. Symbiosis is a type of interaction in which 2 different species are closely associated with each other for a long period of time. And there are 3 main types of symbiosis: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. Let's start with mutualism. This is the relationship between a clownfish and a sea anemone. In this relationship, both species benefit. The clownfish gets to seek shelter in the stinging rays of the sea anemone. Meanwhile, the sea anemone's feces serve as food for the clownfish. The clownfish will also fight off smaller animals that might be a threat to the sea anemone, and they also provide important nutrients to the sea anemone. Parasitism is quite different. In this case, the parasite benefits, but the host is harmed. So we can characterize that as a positive-negative relationship. The host is the organism that the parasite is feeding off of. And there are a couple different parasites. An ectoparasite is a parasite that feeds off of the outside of the host, whereas an endoparasite gets inside the host and feeds from the inside. Our third type of symbiosis is commensalism. In this relationship, one organism benefits and the other is unaffected. For example, these egrets, that's a type of bird, like to hang around the cattle and pick insects and other types of food out of their fur. Clearly, this will benefit the egret, but as far as scientists know, it doesn't really appear to benefit the cattle, but it doesn't harm the cattle either. Another example of commensalism is the barnacle and the whale. Barnacles are these creatures, shell-like creatures, that like to attach themselves to whales and basically catch a ride and get some nutrients in the process. The whale, however, will have no idea that they're even there. So one is benefiting, one is unaffected. Now let's take a look at some other interactions. One that we've already studied a lot is predation. Clearly, in this interaction, the predator benefits and the prey does not. This is not symbiosis because they don't live together very long. If the predator catches the prey, that's it for the prey. Now, prey have certain defense mechanisms. Aside from perhaps being able to run quickly, some of them have cryptic coloration, camouflage, to help them hide. Others have the opposite, aposematic coloration. These are really bright colors that will warn predators that they are toxic or taste unpleasant. And then finally, this is particularly cool, mimicry. This is where a harmless species, like this caterpillar, has evolved to resemble a very dangerous species, and thereby a predator will avoid the harmless species because it mistakes it for the dangerous species. Herbivory is similar, only this time it's the herbivore preying on a plant. And in this case, of course, the herbivore benefits, but the plant does not. And Plants can't run away, but they do have defense mechanisms. For example, thorns or spines, or they may even produce chemicals that are toxic or taste bad. Peppermint, nicotine, and strychnine all come from plants as chemical defenses. Let's finish by exploring competition. This interaction involves a term known as a niche. A niche is simply an organism's job in its ecosystem. It's all of the resources, like food or water, that the species uses to survive. And if you have two different species that share the same niche, they're going to be competing for those resources. And this harms both species because they're going to lose out on resources. Now, in this situation, one of two things can happen. One can outcompete the other. One will survive, one will lose. Or they may adjust their niche so that they both can survive. And here's an example of that. A fundamental niche is shown here. Here we've got a barnacle, and there is no competition. So it can live both above the ocean and below the ocean. So this is its potential niche without competition. But in reality, this barnacle is going to have a realized niche, because in reality, there's going to be other species, such as barnacle B, competing with it. And in this situation, barnacle A reduces the size of its niche. It decides to specialize and live up here, while barnacle B reduces its niche and lives down here. This way, they both can have enough resources to survive, though perhaps not at the same carrying capacity, by resource partitioning. So a species' actual niche is its realized niche, and this happens as a result of competition. And that concludes our exploration of interactions within communities.